I will now move forward to the topic of today. In the beginning, as I mentioned, it's a 4 days long technical training, which comprises of 4 sections. Today is the second day, and I would be covering IEC 62443 policies and procedures. This image is not unknown to anybody. Previous speakers already spent quite a good amount of time explaining the ISA standard basics and ISA standard components. And I'm sure now we have a good idea which component of the standard applies to which sector. I'll focus my talk around IEC 62443-2-1, which essentially describes the step-by-step CSMS. Now, this is interesting word. CSMS is Cybersecurity Management System. If you have been using any ISO standard, this is pretty much a mirror image of ISO 27001 and ISMS, the Information Security Management System, but focused towards the OT. So that's how it is called, the Cybersecurity Management System. The difference is very minor, but it's much more profound because when it comes to inspection or assessment of systems, OT assessment is much more towards the detailed uh, uh, observations and findings. In short, it's a brand new standard and a very interesting one. I specifically highlighted the word cybersecurity management system because I would refer to it as CSMS. So in the upcoming slides or in the upcoming content, if you find me saying CSMS, I basically would refer to the cybersecurity management system. So the word you picked up from the last slide is CSMS, which stands for, again, cybersecurity management system. It is your complete playbook, if you will. It's a complete system which takes a while to establish, but once it is established, you are on the right track. In the coming slides, I would not only excuse me. In the coming slides, I'll only name it CSMS, where remember the CSMS is comprising of the different processes. Pretty much everyone contributes in this journey. So companies are very proud of it once they develop it and they have it as a nice playbook. It is not established in one day or two. It's a journey. We all heard about it several times, right? That cybersecurity is a journey. Similarly, the CSMS is achieved after a long and hard journey, and it's even improving itself on a regular basis, just like any other process. Did I say process? Well, yeah. Uh, and it's a longer one. So please bear with me. We will cover few complicated and few straightforward steps down the line. But again, please stay focused. I will I'll walk you through this process step by step, and at the end of this session, you will get a valuable takeaway points. First step is to initiate the CSMS. That's the step number one, followed by a high-level risk assessment and formation of a policy. The next round takes the detailed risk assessment, followed by the identification of the gaps and establishing countermeasures to bridge those gaps. And then you maintain the CSMS once you have it. So I try to simplify it by putting it into a perspective of simple 5 steps. But as you could imagine, it's a long journey and it takes a little bit of patience to establish. So let's break it down and drill down to the tiny bits of the information and start with the step number one. So the step number one is to establish a security program. In the security program, the first step is to develop a business rationale, which takes input from the CSMS and from all other stakeholders. Now, stakeholders is an important word here. This entire activity is not conducted single-handedly. We connect and take interesting input from the business end and from the operational stakeholders. I'll share more details about those interfaces in a bit, but at the end of the day, we take the leadership commitment as well. Because with the leadership commitment, with the support and the right funding, you could reach the final step. So those who have the important task to budget these things, for example, you will be working in your organization as well. If your task is to do the budgeting things, you will find interesting information and content in this step. If I could just move forward, Uh, I would want to drill down a little bit more towards the business rationale. Business rationale is essentially the basis of all the efforts which you would be spending. Methodology is to prioritize the business consequences in terms of threats, and based on it, you decide the countermeasures. Now, there could be multiple ways to skin the cat, but it's very important which methodology you adopt. Remember, at each step of the way, you would never lose a business touch. So you would find me repeating the business continuity and business rationale time and again during my conversation. The key takeaway is to arrange right countermeasures or adequate countermeasures for the right threats or the adequate threats. But the question here is, what is the threat? Who would decide which threat are you against? Is it the same for everyone around the globe? Why is it important for us to know our threats or our enemies? This is a more important question. The good-looking gentleman that you look at is a general. Thousands of years ago, he said, if you know the enemy, if you know your enemy and you know yourself as well, you do not have to worry about the results of many, many battles. Following the same fundamentals, we gather the intelligence about the threat actors. We gather the intelligence about their capabilities, their activity and intentions, and then we decide what threat are we up against, who are our enemies. We not only use the years of experience, but also the artificial intelligence in this regard. There are so many tools available in the market which could be used to leverage this kind of intelligence. But please not forget that there is always a need for the human agents in the dark web to get hold of such information as well. Because any incident, any event, any anomaly happening in the OT world is typically not publicly published. We move forward with after knowing our threat, uh, let's say our enemy or our threat profiling, we move forward with the next step, which is to do the impact assessment. Now, once we know our enemy, we should know what could be the level of impact that we're expecting from our enemy. And in order to give you an example of impact assessment, imagine the scenario where you have only two variables. You have the impact and you have the probability. It's a very popular image circling around on the social media and the LinkedIn time and again. But I think it's a very interesting way to depict how could you basically interplot the probability and the impact. But I can imagine many people nodding and recalling the three factors which we consider in the IT sector, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. While for the OT side of the house, there is little bit more than what meets the eyes. When you consider the OT side or the ICS environment, the impact on top of the typical information security is basically more than just three factors. So you no longer have only confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You also have few more aspects to take care of. And those more aspects are identification and authentication, use control, restricted data flow, and timely response to event. You might find this interesting that I do not have anything here in the privacy side. And the reason for that is you typically do not hold private information or the recipes in the OT environment. You don't, the one thing you could worry less is basically getting some information stolen from the OT environments, which is related to the intellectual property or some recipes. So this is something which is comforting. Now, simply stating, when you consider all those factors, you take the worst of the worst or max of the max. You simply take the overall impact. For example, in these all parameters, even if one of them is red, the overall impact will be red, means catastrophic. I hope the enterprise risk management matrix is not unknown for many of you. It basically lists down what are the chances for things to go wrong and how bad can it be. If you look at the green area, here are the less likely or the less significant events. And as you grow up, you have the serious ones with the higher frequency. The key takeaway from this is the 5 by 5 or the 4 by 5 matrix so that you could put things into the right perspective when it comes to the impact and alignment of this with the ERM. Because it's a training session and I have some serious audience here, so I should not skip the hands-on part of it, even if it is slightly complicated. But let's take only one use case and one parameter into conversation. Assume the HSE factor. So the lowest impact will not be, uh, okay, so we go from lowest to highest. The lowest will be uh, a slightly notable incident. Then you have one level above, which is the minor incident. You then have the moderate incident, and then you have the major incident, and then catastrophic incident. So we consider every aspect like environment, reputation, legal, finance, and all those aspects, and then map it against the incident severity, notable, minor, moderate, major, or catastrophic. The one thing you might have noticed here is that for every stakeholder, the priorities might be different. For example, let's say for some companies, maybe reputation is something which is paid a lot of attention towards, but maybe for other companies, maybe the environment is more important. So this could vary. So this is not a silver bullet. You could be having it different for multiple organizations. You saw the factors like HSE, finance, reputation, etc. So the question might arise, who are these interfaces? Well, these are the stakeholders I was talking about, and we can never leave them out of the equation. We take that direct input from the operations, which is essentially the jewel of the crown, if you can allow me to say so. Similarly, we have the maintenance staff, who is our eyes and ears in the field. And on the other front, we have the legal teams, which ensure that the regulations are very well taken care of. Similarly, the procurement and the HR offer their input. Here comes the bigger part. Safety. Safety is the key. Whenever we define any framework, so the direct input of HSE and physical security is always considered as a top priority. Question: who do you talk to, by the way? Do you see any stakeholder missing here in this equation? Trust me, I wish this was an interactive session so we could interact, but let me just simply move forward with the answer of it. What I see missing here in the previous picture is the board. Board is missing. So we talk to the board before engaging with the stakeholders. And why do we talk to the board? Is because we would want to know what is their risk appetite as an organization. Remember, risk appetite is a very important step, like a cornerstone, as I demonstrated here. If you mess up in this stage, evaluating the risk appetite, honestly, there is no need to move forward. The goal here is to understand the level of risk the board is willing to take and how the risk translates into money or safety or any other environmental impact. That's a key step. And as a consultant, I pay a lot of attention and a lot of rethinking on this step. For the risks, talking about the risk, for A and B risk is managed by the CISO. And alarm message is applied. People who are in the audience who deal with the risks or impacts, they are familiar with the terminology. Uh, for the serious and the above, basically, maybe the board is more likely to handle those. The risk should be mitigated with the high priority effort, with the quarterly progress review, with the temporary measures in case of emerging risk. However, uh, there should be a proper risk mitigation body which will be taking care of each step, documenting, and then making a playbook. Is everyone with me? We are doing, we are basically done with the step number one. We now know what are the risks. We also know that who will take care of the ownership of the treatment of risk. Can somebody imagine what would be the step number two or the second step? Well, that would be even more exciting one. The second step, everybody, is to list down the scenarios. We go through the documents, we estimate what can go wrong in the worst case scenario. In simple terms, this is where you give an impression to the board how bad can the bad news be. Why do you do that? Well, the purpose of this exercise is to take the leadership of your company on board, the CEO, the COO, the CFO. Well, they will understand what are the worst case scenarios or the consequences. So, I would say not a very joyful conversation, I would say, but an important one to have. Why we refer to this as a high level risk assessment is because it's not a detailed risk assessment yet, because you don't really care how the hackers will hack the system. We're only focusing at this stage what would be the worst impact if the system gets compromised. So the aim here is to say whether whichever attack happens, however way it happens, whichever vulnerability is present in the system, we consider the worst impact scenario. I hope you get the point of the high level risk assessment, but let me give you an example here. Okay, so this is, I tried to animate few things. This is essentially, broader aspect of a complete ecosystem of one vertical. So I picked up a manufacturing, let's say, facility where you have the IT side, and then down the line you have a massive, massive OT side of the house. In here, let's see what could go wrong in the event of a compromise. For the IT side, typical attack surface is phishing or browsing or malwares. But when it comes to the OT side, the attack surface is huge. The first, I would say, the biggest challenge that I often come across in the OT environment, or if you pick up the reports for the OT challenges, the biggest threat you would find is the one coming from the USB media. You then have some misconfiguration issues. You then have some issues with the firmwares. You remember the supply chain issues. You then have issues with the remote access, especially after the COVID circumstances. Remote access basically started to become more and more popular and normalized. And I feel that a lot of vulnerabilities are popping up with the emergence of the remote access. And last but not the least is the biggest debate, the IT OT junction, where a lot of debate happens and a lot of approvals are taken. So, in the nutshell, this is all you have. Remember, my conversation started with what can go wrong, how bad it can be. This is what can go wrong and how bad it can be. Moving forward, the next step would be, well, you might be wondering, how will we do the risk calculation? The risk is always a calculated thing, and we always use a formula behind the scene. The formula could be different, by the way. The nature of calculation can also be different. But at the end of the day, it's a systematic and very straightforward process. In the nutshell, risk is a multiplication of impact and likelihood, but then likelihood can even go further when it comes to various scenarios. Allow me to use a very simple example. If you pick a car, if you try to decide which car should you have, you would try to say, okay, what impact I'm expecting, what can go wrong, and what's the probability of getting myself impacted. So the risk will be multiplication of how bad it is and how likely it is. The probability is a complicated thing to calculate. It's a multiplication of two factors. You have threat frequency and vulnerability. Means in order to identify how likely I am getting hit is the dependency on how many events were there in the past, how many accidents have been happening around the area, and again, it's also a complicated topic to identify how many events have been happening because this also depends What was the history and what was the motivation of the people who might impact me? So this is one side of the thought process. The other side of the thought process is my native vulnerability of my own system. How vulnerable is my own system? Well, then this also will depend on two factors. First factor is how strong is the control or the strength of the system that I have, the native strength of my system. And then what would be the strength of the enemy or the person or a factor which will be impacting me? The factor of the threat also depends on two parameters. Means, is this somebody who's focused around me or is just hitting everybody in the area? And then the capability of the threat means, is it a newbie? Is it uh, let's say script kiddie sitting in the mom's garage trying to hack everybody in the field, or somebody which is state sponsored and have real muscles behind the scenes? So it's a very awkward example, by the way, but I try to simplify things with an example of a vehicle by elaborating how will I calculate the risk. Same thing applies for the systems. You can put any, and you can think of any scenario here. Once we know the probability, once we know the formula to calculate the risk, we can move forward and then step onwards to establish the CSMS. Next step, everybody, is slightly demanding. And the demanding part is for the attention from all of you, because now things will go slightly in a complicated manner and I don't want to lose your attention. Well, at this step, we establish the policy, the organization, and the awareness. Do not lose interest again, please, because all this graphic is saying is that the pieces of acts to define a particular policy. We take the risk tolerance as a step number one. Okay, we list down the priorities of the risk. Based on these two, we create a certain policy and procedure. We implement those policies, okay, and then we train the staff accordingly. And we are missing some if we are missing some staff, we do the hiring of the staff. And let's not forget, it's a policy-based journey. It's a process-based journey which is subject to improvement. So at the heart of it, we have a regular audit mechanism which essentially will refine the SMS as well, the CSMS as well. Sounds fair so far? So what's the most interesting part here? Some of them will say policies, focus should be on the policies. Some of you would be saying maybe the training aspect. Some of you will be saying maybe adding more staff, more hiring. Well, let's take the hiring.
Iqbal Sahab, you are muted.
Okay, um, please do not mute me again if anybody did that. Apologies. I hope I was not mute for a very long time. Did I complete my previous slide?
Yes, which is the most important
Oh,
point
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
is
Sure,
what
sure. Thank you, thank you. So, what are the most interesting things for you guys? Few of you will be thinking, okay, most important is the policies part. Some of you might be saying training the staff is the most important thing for me. Some of you will be saying, okay, hiring will be more interesting. Well, let's take the hiring part and move forward. This, everybody, typically is an OT security organization chart. This could be an organization to organization variation. By the way, it's not a silver bullet again, but what remains the same is the positioning of these roles. At the top, we have the business individuals, business folks, where because we remember we said enterprise risk management has to be the governing body calling the shots. Down below, we have the committee for the HSE risk, Information Security Committee, and the internal audit staff. Most of you who are listening are probably part of the steering committee, which usually is a large group, but prominent role is the CISO. Well, CISO has recently become a very, attractive word if you follow the LinkedIn and the social platforms, and why not? CISO, as we discussed, leads from the front and leverages the information security team and the risk assessment group on the ground. Now, sounds interesting, right? But what happens to the policies? Because today's topic is policies. So let's drill down what will be the policies arrangement. So here we are back to the policies. Now, if you can ignore the graphic on the right hand side, please, again, I want to keep it surface level to not confuse you with a lot of details. If you could ignore the graphic on the right hand side and look only on the blue one, I would want to explain this one first. The ERM, enterprise risk governance thing, will essentially um, define the strategy framework and then pass it on to the information security risk management group, who will then come up with the treatment for the serious risks and then pass on the report to enrich the ERM part. Now, the purpose is to monitor the risk all the time. All right. So there is always a feedback mechanism to refine and reiterate things. Now, I will not go through the right-hand side graphic at the moment because it's essentially the detailed version of the blue one. And I would let you study it later on if I pass these slides to you. If anybody have a question, I'm really open to answer. If not, I have a question from you side, from all of you. My question here is, when do you go to the site? Well, the next step is all about going to the site. For now, we were defining the CSMS program, the policies, enforcement, the loopback mechanism, and the refining part of the house. The next step would be the detailed risk assessment, where we perform the detailed risk assessment on the site, where we get the real observation from the assets on the ground. Why? Because at this stage, we physically inspect the environment, we monitor the connectivity, we read through the traffic patterns, obviously not by human eye, but through the technologies. There are so many technologies available in the market. You have the intrusion detection systems, you have Nozomi, Clarity, Dragos, Trend Micro, UpSWAT. There's so many tools available to make this observation based on artificial intelligence and not based on the human limitation. We then report the identified vulnerabilities and report the risks as well. So, to collect the inventory, do the screening, identify the vulnerabilities, prioritize the tasks, and then report them. Does anybody remember the 5 by 5 matrix in the background? Remember, we started with this. Well, this is the result of the detailed risk assessment. So once you have the exercise done, you have a clear list of identified risks and their severity and potential impacts, which is on the left-hand side. Now, it depends which way do you want to present it or which way do you want to represent this detail. If you ask me, I am a big fan and admirer of the spider charts. Anybody familiar with the spider charts? The reason I am very comfortable with these is because you have a clear indication of the threat of the impact matrices. Allow me to go back. I think it's easy to forget these things. So I said you have the information security impacts, you have the ICS security impacts. So you combine all of them and you associate an icon to them so that you can, by the look of it, you can tell. So confidentiality, integrity, availability, identification, use control, restricted data flow, and the timely response to event. If you bring them on to this spider chart, you get the initial risk, where you said, okay, from the initial risk standpoint, look, inside is means good, outside means bad. A means low risk, and then if you go outbound, B, C, D, E is bad. Means if you have a blue dot in the external area, it's bad. So initial risk was more towards that timely response to events. This organization was bad at the timely response of events and then use control. After the controls were implemented or after some things were changed, the residual risk tells you you are still okay with the integrity, availability. You literally improved on the use control. You reduced down to the one step, and you also reduce the timely response of event impact. So it will be giving you a good idea about the before and the after. Let's move to the next one, which is to select and implement the countermeasures. Remember, you cannot, let's say, control everything with a single silver bullet. It would be a chain of events, or it would be a group of policies or countermeasures to eliminate some of the risks. Now that we know what are the risks, it's time to mitigate them. Again, slightly complex graphic, but please bear with me. I'll explain. For the countermeasures, we learn from the system's inherent tolerance, and we can then select the countermeasure considering the level of threat. Also, we will consider the budget as well. Remember, we will never lose the touch to the business continuity, viability, and the business aspects. We then implement the countermeasures and develop the system so that this becomes the baseline. Remember the word baseline, where you essentially list down some of the things in the playbook, and then you start from there in the next iteration. We also give or take input of the risk assessment and business continuity, because at the end of the day, you don't want to misalign with the business continuity. So there is a input in and out from this. This is the slide which perhaps most of you were waiting for. The countermeasures typically are a checklist or a detailed Excel sheet, but I want to list down some of them here. Top of the list is the personal security or personnel security, if you will. Please do not forget, human factor could become the weakest link of the chain or the strongest link of the chain. Rest, we have some known terms like network security, access control. I would want to expand on the personal security a bit, because awareness and personnel security is sometimes top of the line. To avoid single point of failure or dependency, we go with the two-man rule, first of all, in any environment. Now, forgive me for using the word man, because I don't want to get into a conversation of, but it's typically how it is stated. To use the budget more effectively, the standard dictates to not throw technology boxes everywhere, but instead of implementing a lot of technology, you spend around 90% on the development of the staff, because the people are more important part, and very little on the technology boxes. The security should be a culture. The next is security should be a culture, just like HSE. We need constant reminders at each step of the way that security should be a culture. The next one is security by obscurity is a curse. We aim to develop positive security culture. And the last thing is the personnel security could be a make or break deal, because the first thing the management would happily invest in is the technology boxes, and a lot of awareness has to go around. The question from audience: how much should we spend? Okay, this is a good one. It will depend on what enemy do you have and where do you want to reach. This will depend on what's your risk appetite. This will again depend on who is your enemy. This is a very popular statement that if you are making chocolates in Switzerland, your enemies are very less. And if you are from the chemical factory in the Middle East, obviously your threat is different, your enemies are different. In order to not speculate, in order to have a little bit of calculated approach, we define the security levels. We can either define to reach SL1, which ensures that there is a native protection against casual or coincidental violation. This is the least security level that you can have. We then have SL2, which ensures that there is a little bit of protection against the intentional violations. For example, the adversaries with the low resources, low motivation, a little bit of generic skill set. Many organizations are already standing at SL2. In my experience, most of the organizations are aiming to reach, or they have already reached to SL2 level. The interesting upgrade is SL3, which protects the basically protects the organizations against intentional violations using sophisticated means and moderate motivations. And you guessed it, the worst which could be happening to you is the state level attacks. And in order to avoid or brace up against the state level attacks, the best you could achieve is to have SL4, the level which not only protects you against the very sophisticated violations, but also meets the highest compliances. So people who are from the GRC side of the house, they will be very happy to see that. But the question is, can we be SL4 everywhere? Can I ask the management to make everything SL4? Well, maybe not. Remember, we started with the conversation. You should define where you should reach, but there should not be a single bullet approach. Means in the entire plant, in the entire ICS environment, you cannot go SL4 everywhere. The common suggestion is that on every conduit, if it's, remember the zones and conduit concept, when there is a communication between multiple zones through a conduit, each conduit should be SL3 rated at least. When you talk between two systems, between two zones, the conduit should be SL3 rated. So you still remember SL3? SL3 is basically which is protecting you against the intentional violations. However, if you have safety systems, either you have a safety system zone down to level 2 or you have safety information system down to level 3, any zone or any conduit which is connecting from here to there should be SL4 rated for safety systems. And then if you are connecting your organization to the IT, if there is a junction between IT and OT, this junction should be SL4 rated. Means there should be a native capability to avoid or mitigate against intentional violations and state-sponsored attacks. So this is, if you ask me, this is a slide of the day where we define what should be protected, where should be protected, how should it be rated. Question: do you have a checklist of best practices and hardening? I would love to give you many because it's a process. You have performed the assessment, you develop the treatment for the identified risks, and then you repeat it. Another question: are there milestones for each steps for risk treatment plan? Well, there should be. This is a very generic, very typical, not a very specific one to a particular organization. Without revealing any details of an organization, I would want to present a typical risk treatment plan, which is spread as a years, as a milestones, and as classified as people, process, and technology. I think you still remember that we said that it's a combination of three parameters. You have people, you have process, and you have technology. These three are your main pillars. So people, process, technology. You then spread the risk treatment plan initiatives across the plan based on the timelines and based on the classification. There are a few things. For example, colored yellow are the colored gray are the treatments which you perform on the micro level, on area level, on person level. The yellow are basically related to the treatment or to the changes you perform at the macro level or at organization level. Well, not all of the recommendations are shown here, by the way. However, the detailed report, when you have assessment of a particular organization, will list down all the details pertaining to each control. I hope you're not entirely bored at the moment, so we are through the tough part. The next and final step is to maintain the CSMS. Well, to your surprise, there is no step 6. Yes, you can jinx right now, even if you are alone. The maintenance of the CSMS is not a step, it's a process, it's a journey, remember? It's a continuous improvement and looks like this. So you go through all those 5 steps. Remember, we discussed the identification of threat, ERM planning, high level risk assessment, detailed risk assessment, policy making, and countermeasures. So when you repeat them, this would be referred to as the maintenance of the CSMS. Good. Uh, I promise I have only a couple more slides remaining, but I also would want to promise that these are very practical ones. Conformance is the key to success for any CSMS maintenance. It's also something known as compliance. Conformance means you actually go to the organization and you go and with your own consultant eyes, you see yourself if the CSMS is being implemented or not. Now, this could be a scheduled audit or an unscheduled audit. What I'm now going to tell you is very serious stuff. If you are still listening to me, please focus on the screen. Oftentimes, the CSMS implementation is there, but the effectiveness is not present. Let me repeat it for you. You have the policies in place, but they are not effective. How many of you change your passwords? All of us, for sure. But is it effective? Yes or no? I'll give you an example. If there is an obligation for me that on my portal I have to reset the password every 90 day, every every 3 months. So I will say, okay, my password today is Iqbal at 123. After 90 days, I don't want to have another password. I will simply reverse the sequence of the last numbers. It will say password at 91 is Iqbal at 321. And I keep on repeating it. So I will tell myself, okay, if I forget the password, it's either Iqbal at 123 or Iqbal at 321. Remember, the process is there. Password is being changed regularly, but it's not effective because anybody can guess that it's either Iqbal 123 or 321. I'll give you the another example. Everybody knows that there should be antivirus, there should be a scanning, there should be a malware scanning tool. But are the controls of the malware implementation effective? Yes or no? If you have case number one, where you have only one scanner, one antivirus agent, it could be McAfee, Kaspersky, Bitdefender, ClamAV. I'm not in favor of anybody, but if you have one, the chances to catch a particular malware with only one antivirus is very, very low. So if you still have one control, your effectiveness is still low. If you have, on the other side, if you have more than one, your effectiveness could be more than that. So it cannot be single policy for every organization. It could be multiple ones. Let me give you another example. All of us are using the two-factor authentication, right? You can have a SMS-based two-factor authentication. But the problem is it's not equally effective. It is ticking the box. The GRC team will be very happy that the multi-factor authentication is there. But is it effective? Yes or no? In the normal cases, if you have two-factor authentication over the SMS, I would say it could be intercepted easily. First of all, the SMS is sent clear text. So if you go to any Chinese market, you will be able to find a VTS or small intercepting antenna, which could basically read the transmitted clear text SMS. Remember when in very very old days when you sit next to the computer speakers and somebody will call you on your phone, you will see the interface and this sound in your speakers. So same thing here, your text could be intercepted. The one level above is the app-based authenticator, where you have an app, your authentication is happening over the app. But in the compromised case, if you are using the same mobile which you're using for the authenticator and your child plays the games on the same mobile and it gets compromised, you cannot be 100% certain that this two-factor authentication is effective, equally effective. You have another type, which is a hardware token. In my opinion, I have not seen any compromised case so far because this is so far very hardware based, and unless you hack the whole RSA and the seed of the certificates, the chances to get this sort of cybersecurity token mechanism compromise is very less likely. My goal is to not give you the types of two-factor authentication today. The goal is I wanted to mention how the same control could be least effective or could be most effective based on the way you roll it out. So, same applies to the CSMS. If your controls are effective, the results will be more beneficial. Promise, last slide. Compliance again should be towards the new updates or regulations, or if there is a new best practice or recommendation from the vendors, this should also be the CSMS should be capable to adopt the new regulations, adopt new practices, adopt new recommendations from the vendors or from the success stories. It should also be proactive. It should trigger in the event of any incident or if there is a change of threat landscape or benchmarking. You remember the recent supply chain attack? I think SolarWind, a lot of the baselining was impacted because nobody imagined that attack of this nature could happen and a lot of companies will get compromised in a very unusual way. As I said, it's a journey, it's quite a long journey, efforts of so many interfaces. It's a very demanding exercise, but at the end of the day, it gives you peace of mind and it gives you a sense of higher security and safety. If you ask me, if I invest in security, I'm essentially investing in the peace of mind. That would be my goal. Thank you very much. This was a very long one. I hope all of you are still with me and hope this was interesting. And I want to thank you all for listening. Um, if there is any question, I would be happy to answer.